afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Lunch and Learn, which is a partnership series between the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights and the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. I'm Kyla Hannington, the Public Outreach and Engagement Division Chief with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. And we are supported backstage today by my colleague, Tiana Davis, also from the Office of Human Rights. 20 years ago this week, Hurricane Katrina developed into a catastrophically large Category 5 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico before making landfall on August 29th as a Category 3 in Louisiana. Very few of us who were alive then, no matter where we lived at the time, have forgotten this storm. If we weren't there then, we remember the stories we heard, the stories we continue to hear about its devastating impact to the people, to the region, and to the country. Today, we mark 20 years since that storm with three very special guests, people who lived through Katrina in or very near to its path. I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce you to who we have with us. These are wonderful, wonderful guests. Juyanne James is a Louisiana native and the author of The Persimmon Trail and Other Stories, as well as Table Scraps and Other Essays. Her stories and essays have been published in journals such as the Louisville Review, Bayou Magazine, 1111, Thrice, Ponder Review, Xavier Review, Burning Word Literary Journal, and Non-Binary Review, and included in the anthologies News Stories from the South and Something in the Water, 20 Louisiana Stories. Her essay, Table Scraps, was a notable essay in the Best American Essays 2014 collection. Juyanne lives and teaches in New Orleans, and we had her as a guest a few years ago, and it is just absolutely wonderful to have her back. It's good to see you. Dr. Audrey Lau is no doubt familiar to you regular viewers as our event partner and co-host for Lunch and Learn, and it's an honor to have her now as a panelist for this important discussion. Audrey is a native of Pennsylvania who moved to Mississippi in 2003 to pursue her graduate degrees in history at the University of Mississippi. She was in Oxford, Mississippi for the duration of the storm and its aftermath, helping hurricane-affected students transition to University of Mississippi mid-semester and participating in relief efforts. Audrey, nice to have you as panelist.
Thanks.
Julie Liddell Whitehead lives and writes from Mississippi. Her debut fiction collection, Hurricane Baby Stories, came out in August 2024 from Madville Publishing. The characters in these stories, set in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, face extreme circumstances with only their inner resources to count on. Although many of the characters did not experience the typical physical losses of family members or property, they persist in living lives that become psychological nightmares. As a freelancer, Julie writes on topics concerning mental health education, and mental health advocacy. She was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder in her mid-30s in 2006, and she blogs about her experiences and daily life with bipolar on the site Not Quite Right, Living with Bipolar Disorder. She has a bachelor's degree in communication with a journalism emphasis and a master's degree in English, both from Mississippi State University, and an MFA in creative writing from Mississippi University for Women. And Julie, you are new to us, and it is absolutely wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all for being with us. To get us started, I'm hoping that you could just each take a few minutes to talk about where you were when Katrina came and your experience. And I know your experience is going to be much greater than a few minutes, but if you can just start introducing it to us. Juyanne, if we could start with you, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's really good to be here. Wow. It was quite a time. I was living on the West Bank of New Orleans, which is significant because it was the East Bank that took on most of the flooding. And so I was actually able to come back to the West Bank a lot sooner than, a lot of people who could not return to New Orleans so quickly. So I had just begun working as an adjunct at the University of Holy Cross here in the West Bank, wonderful school. And I think I had one class. And then we were dismissed because Katrina was coming. And I was also had a class that I was teaching at University of New Orleans, my alma mater. And I had planned to start my MFA in writing at Spalding University in Louisville, Kentucky. So all of that was going to happen in November. All of this was happening. And I was all excited and had so many things going on. And then Katrina came. And what my siblings and I typically do and did prior to Katrina is when they said a hurricane was coming, we went north to the farmland where I grew up, a little place called, Sunny Hill, next to Mount Herman, next to Kentwood and Franklinton. So we would go there, and it's like an hour and a half drive north. And so typically it was enough to keep us from feeling the effects of whatever hurricane might hit New Orleans. But this time Katrina came right over us, unfortunately. And so we rode it out in a little old house. My dad was still living. My brother David, my sister Hattie was still living. My sister Laura had just been diagnosed with kidney problems. So we had to be concerned about getting her to dialysis. And yet, moments after the storm hit, we understood that we weren't going to be able to go anywhere. Trees were lying everywhere across the roads. They missed our house, but you couldn't get anywhere. So my brother, who is someone who is very Samson, he is really good at that type of thing. So he took out his chainsaw, and we literally just went down the road, clearing the highway for people to get through. And so that was kind of our existence, helping people. And every day we would wake up and just go and try and find food, try to find water. If you had gas, typically you didn't have gas. So it was interesting. It was hot because after the winds of Katrina left us, then it was just stifling heat. And so you don't have air conditioning, which we really require here in New Orleans. And so it's just hot. You couldn't sleep. It was just miserable. You're looking for food, and it's just the uncertainty of it all. So yeah, that's kind of was my experience.
I want to highlight something that you said for listeners who maybe weren't there or haven't lived through this kind of situation: the hunt for water. Like I think so many of us take the access to water for granted, and the idea that you can be without such a, I mean, there's not even a word. Critical is too small of a word for the need for water. And so, chains on your way down the street to try to get supplies.
It's the little things that matter in moments like that when you have such devastation. Really, it's just water, food, things you count on, and you forget, that you don't have them until, when you need them. So,
yeah. Well, thank you. Julie, can you talk to us a little bit about where you were and your experiences?
Yes, ma'am. I was here in Brandon, Mississippi, which is 100 miles inland from the coast. So we were not expecting anything particularly evil, except I had a really bad feeling when they kept repeating Category 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the Sunday before Katrina going to the grocery store and stocking up on things you could eat without electricity, and stocking up on bottled water and that kind of thing. And not many people were doing that, but we were. And I had a 9-year-old child, a 6-year-old child, and a 6-month-old baby.
Wow.
And I knew it was going to be bad when the weatherman said at 9 in the morning that the rain we had outside was what it happened in Jackson when Hurricane Camille came over. And I thought, we don't even have the real hurricane yet. And you're saying that this is like Camille? And we lost a lot of trees, came over us. We could have lost the doors on the front of our house. The only thing holding that together was the deadbolt because of the way the winds hit. We were without electricity for a week, without air conditioning, like you had said. Our home was not damaged, praise be to God. But I made sure we just stayed in the house. My husband, on the other hand, was delivering generators throughout Mississippi. They were the distributor for the gas generators that people desperately needed. And that was a very difficult job. But I think what stunned us was how extensive the damage was as far north as we were,
Mhm.
because that's ridiculous for it to get that far inland and still be so powerful. We had not seen that, I don't think, in Mississippi ever quite that far inland. So that was hard, but it was a very difficult time to live through. We knew neighbors that had lost roofs and had trees on their houses and that sort of thing, and we tried to do what relief work we could. We gave away baby clothes to the shelter that was down the street from us, and just tried to stay out of everybody's way that was helping.
Right, right. Well, thank you. It is really like, I think, again, for those of us who weren't there, to try to understand the the breadth of the storm is probably, even after all these years, like not something we can. Those of us who weren't there are difficult to take in. Audrey, can you talk to us about your experience?
I was in the library a lot. I was starting my doctoral year, and I was, just coming off defending my master's thesis. And so I was like, I'm going to start the year right. And so I'd been in the library quite a bit, and I had returned home to pick up something, and I got phone calls from my mom, and I was like, okay, what does she want? So I picked up the phone, and she said, "What's your plan?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Do you not know what's going on?" I said, "Not really." I said, "There's a lot of people in town, but I think there's a football game, where it's Ole Miss and, and everything." And you kept seeing people come into town. It was getting really, traffic was really heavy. People were really impatient, but, that wasn't really out of the ordinary for like a Friday, Saturday, Thursday build up for a big game. So I turned on the Weather Channel, and there's this humongous thing in the Gulf. And I was like, oh my God, like, what do you do with that? And none of my Southern friends, who had helped me through, this is what to do during the tornadoes. I'm from Pennsylvania. I have no idea. I mean, when we had, dealings with hurricanes in Pennsylvania, it was always rain, lots of rain, flooding, things like that. We lived through, Camille and Agnes were names that we learned because they'd flooded so many areas and basements and things. But besides that, I really hadn't had any sort of experience. And I'm looking at my Southern friends are like, yeah, we're having a hurricane party. And I thought, oh, okay, is that what you do? And so what was, I think, significant to me was like, okay, I'm going to go get some things, but I don't really know what to do. They told me to fill up my gas. I did that. And then we just kind of sat. And there was a point kind of toward the early evening when the lights went out. And I was like, what is this all about? And I called a friend, had my cell phone. She's like, I hope you had it charged, because we're probably going to have electricity for a little while. They're doing that so the transformers don't blow up. And I thought, oh, great. This is, but we lost power maybe for 48 hours. But I watched the storm come in. The bands, you could see them kind of come in from that blue sky to it was really interesting kind of, I was fascinated. I was, this is my new shiny experience. But as the night went on, we knew it was really bad because it just seemed like they said it was going to, get smaller and smaller and wasn't going to be as bad. But, we found out later it was still Category 1 when it was still in Mississippi. I mean, it was just charged through the state. We woke up to a lot of, downed trees and, a lot of damage like to houses and things. But for the most part, like, it wasn't too bad. But there was that immediate, people asked us not to use a lot of gas. They had calls for, there were at the old Walmart in town, they had refugees who had come up from Louisiana and Mississippi and other parts. And so there was a call for a lot of clothing and blankets and supplies. And so like a lot of us spent the afternoon kind of driving things around. And there was an immediate call for trucks and things, gas cans, because people were basically taking all their tools and driving down to the coast and staying to help out. And so that was kind of our reality for the next few months. There was just a constant, churches were sending money. I remember like Sunday morning we went to church, and they asked for 1,000 from each of the large churches in Oxford, and each of them gave about 5,000 just right off the bat, cash to just, pay for things and send things down, because the pictures we were seeing were just terrible. And it was just heartbreaking. And then as the, kind of month or two after, we were working to transition a lot of students who were coming in from the schools down south who weren't able to go to school. We were bringing them in for the semester, people taking in roommates and things like that to make that transition easier. But we also saw a lot over the course of the next few years, students who had waited that year. They were supposed to come up to Ole Miss and had waited, to take care of families and things like that. And so it was kind of a really long, I think that, when Julie says about what was surprising to me was just the long recovery. I just thought that things were going to happen and they didn't.
I want to talk more about that because we're 20 years out and we're having this event, right?
Can I ask Audrey a question?
Yeah.
Do you think that a lot of those, what we call the Katrina diaspora of people, have they returned or have they tried to return to New Orleans? What percentage do you know?
I don't know the percentage, but I do know that a lot of the people that came up to Oxford stayed, or at least settled in Mississippi. But we were constantly meeting kids who had, that was part of their, essays coming into school. I was in New Orleans and we lived in FEMA housing. I mean, I met those kids teaching them for years later. And, kids that people where I were friends with, a very good friend of mine got Lyme's disease from, being bitten during the cleanup and the recovery. I know on the coast and areas like where Mississippi and Louisiana meet was especially terrible. I mean, they were without power for months. So it was definitely, like I was explaining to Kyla earlier, I see pictures of, the storm. I see pictures of, just online, the videos and things. And it's very hard to even now to watch them.
Yeah. Well, let me turn that back to you, Juyanne. Like, what do you see in New Orleans 20 years later in terms of just people who left, and we've heard, neighborhoods being completely just like historical neighborhoods just gone. What happens? What does it look like now?
Well, I think we're missing about, if we were to get back to pre-Katrina levels, about 100,000 people. And even the people who are here, a lot of them are from other places, and they've just sort of displaced or replaced a lot of the people who left. So the people who, many thousands of people who left, there's still lots of them, I'm sure, who want to come back. When I teach, sometimes I think there's for example, a young man in one of my classes this semester, he and his family have moved back from Texas. And he said his parents are really just excited about being back. So here's 20 years later, people still trying to get back to the city because most people who live here, once you live here, it's hard to leave. And once you leave, you always want to come back. So yeah, my experience is that people are still trying to come back. It's still not as peopled as it should be or could be. But it's probably going to take a long time. I can remember writing about the trees, for example, and someone said, well, it's going to take 250 years to get back to the pre-Katrina level of the trees that we had. That's a long time. So I think the people as well, it may take a while for all of them to get back, the ones who want to come back. But as Audrey is saying, a lot of people have just settled elsewhere and have found new lives. I have a friend named Donna, and she lives in Houston. And she has left, and she and her husband have made a life there, and that's what they did. So, yeah.
Yeah, and someone in the chat has said that they know that many people relocated to Dallas, and that there's a strong network of resilience in those communities in the Metroplex. And then noting that, of course, some people didn't ever want to relocate, and some stayed and some had to leave. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the things, I was in Canada when Katrina hit, and one of the things that we heard when we heard horrible things, right? But some of what we heard was misinformation. So there were some stories being told. I don't know if anyone here has read the book Blindness by Jose Saramago. I can't recommend it because it's too awful to read in terms of content. But there was reports coming out of like I'm so sorry for everybody in Louisiana for what I'm about to say. There's like a dome. I can't what it's called. Like a sports
Superdome.
Superdome. Okay, I'm so sorry. I just feel like I'm going to get kicked out of America for not knowing the Superdome. Okay. But we were hearing the stories that were not true. They were, I think they were racist. I think they were, I don't know what the word is, but like classist, these stories about people doing like the book Blindness, basically. And so what I'm wondering is for people that's a whole hour-long conversation right there, but just sort of in the moment of Katrina, were you hearing these stories of these kind of horror stories, or were you more the kindness of like, you're talking about Audrey, is talking about supplies. Julie, you're talking about your husband driving supplies around. Like, what was that experience in terms of what you were hearing about the human element in the storm and in the aftermath of the storm?
Well, I was a freelance news reporter when all this was going on. And one thing that struck me very early was how many stories were coming out that tried to sound peppy.
Peppy? Like cheery? Okay.
Yeah, like you would ask somebody, like a TV guy would ask somebody, how are you making it? And they'd say, we lost everything but mama and the dog, but we're okay. We'll be fine. And I don't know how much of that was denial or just not wanting to show out on television. But there were a lot of those kind of stories coming out in the first couple of days. And that's kind of what inspired Hurricane Baby was I thought, what about the people that aren't all right with all of this? Mm-hmm. But as to what came out during the Superdome, there were people repeating that like it was gospel.
Okay.
Yeah. And it took a long time to sort out what happened, but some of it is just a function of the 24-hour news cycle. There are only so many ways you can say this place has been leveled once every hour on the hour. You got to have something else to talk about. And so they would hear something new to talk about and wouldn't check it out because maybe they heard it from somebody reliable or maybe they didn't. But it was something to talk about. It was new. It was different. And, we've all heard about newspapers. If it bleeds, it leads.
Okay.
But the narrative shifted very quickly from those initial resilient stories to those terrifying stories that came out of the Superdome that were misinformation. But it's kind of like what I've seen happen in war reporting. I've never reported on a war. I'll just go ahead and say that. But I've watched a lot of them be reported on. It's just a case of wanting to get news out and not having time or resources to check and see if it's right or wrong. I'm not absolving the news organizations because they absolutely bear the brunt of a lot of blame on what went on during Katrina. But it was a human response to an unimaginable tragedy. And, it's just sad.
Yeah, I'll say, there were a lot of economically disadvantaged people who were left, and those were a lot of the people maybe that they were discussing. But there are a lot of other reasons why people didn't leave. People in New Orleans typically, a large percentage of them didn't leave, even if they knew a hurricane was coming. Still, people don't leave. They're
strong people.
In their houses. Yeah, that's kind of just what you do. So these weren't bad people or all the things that they were saying was happening. These were just people who were really caught in a bad situation. And one of the things for us, my family, we were again, away from the situation because we were north of New Orleans, and we were experiencing a lot of the same disadvantages. But the only thing that we had in terms of understanding what was happening in New Orleans was radio. And so we would listen to the radio, and we really counted on those local channels, the people we had, grown up listening to, all of those reporters who we knew well, and we could trust what they were saying. And so we really didn't have the national news and all of that. So I did not experience that. But I will say, yeah, New Orleans, as you're saying, they're resilient. The people, if they were fighting or some of the things that were happening, it was just to survive. And unless you've been in a situation where you have to survive, you really don't know what you would do.
Right.
Yeah.
So to take some of that out of context, yeah, I'm sure it was just sensationalism and, whatever, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think too, part of it was just turning off the news. I think we've learned since, September 11th, even that it's not healthy to keep the news on. And I think for a lot of us, like not having power was great. But I think also the relief efforts gave us something to focus on. And, we could tend to the people who, hadn't heard from their parents, because that was a big thing. We had so many people who just were in limbo in those first few weeks, not knowing where people were, they didn't have anything, and, cell phones only work so long. And that even then it was still not as like what we know of today in terms of phones. So I think that, I think in terms of, having those recovery things to focus on, locally and things like that. But I think there was also like in the back of a lot of our minds is that a lot of the people who couldn't get out were people who needed the most help. Yeah. And, that's really what I canceled, I had a friend coming. I said, look, I can't pick you up. I don't, I can't spare gas for you. I'm not going up to Memphis. It's too much. They understood, but there were other things too that we just, after a while you can't keep your meat. So we were barbecuing and, taking food over. And I saw a lot of humanity, and I think that if not for the people of Mississippi and Louisiana, those immediate communities who helped, I think they helped the most when the need was the greatest.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that distressed me the most is that when I was allowed to come back, and I think it was like October, because again, I was living on the West Bank and it did not, we didn't have the flooding, and my apartment complex actually didn't sustain a lot of damage. And so I was welcome to come back, and it was the people that I really missed the most, and having to, like drive down the street and see them put up all the FEMA trailers into these little parks where they can get people a place to live. And that was just really distressing, because on the news, you just heard, oh, we just don't have anywhere for these people to go. People wanting to come home. They couldn't get back home. They had nowhere to live. And it just really cost me a lot of heartache to just watch that, to be there, and all the missing people that were not in the city. And sometimes I just, walk around and you just didn't see anyone. And it was just a strange time.
Yeah. In the last few years, we've had the hurricane-caused flooding in Western North Carolina, which is not too far away from where we are here in the DMV area. There's, of course, the horrible, horrible flooding in Texas. And, we're hearing that negative climate impacts, so climate change has already and will continue to increase these really extreme weather events. And I look at Katrina, and this is my ignorance as it relates to climate change, but I look at Katrina as kind of one of the first really major climate change events in the United States, where we really can see this like super powered storm. And so for you, when you hear about these other, I don't even really know how to phrase this question, but as people who lived through this thing, 20 years ago, which still has so much impact, which I do want us to talk about too, like how it's still resonating. But when you get the news out of Western North Carolina, out of Texas, and you've had this experience, I guess I want to know kind of how it feels for you, but also what are teachable moments that you live there. What can we be doing? Like, I'm here in Maryland now, and something terrible happens in Maryland. Like, what's something that I can take to be like, okay, if this happens, here's how I can be the most use in my community? Or here, do you have a takeaway for people that you learned?
One, I think, and this has been repeated, is don't wait on the government to rescue you. Yeah, because I mean, that they had hurricane supplies staged in Hattiesburg, yeah, and Meridian, so that they could get to the coast quicker and get supplies. They were prepared, they thought. And then the hurricane was so strong it destroyed Hattiesburg and Meridian.
Mm.
So that and destroyed all those supplies. So not many people know that, but just the idea, and this is also in Hurricane Baby, is that so many people, you're in the first little bit, you're going to have to fend for yourself, and you need to prepare as best you can for the worst eventuality.
Right.
And
So
I
don't
also know that you can't prepare for the worst eventuality because if you've never been through it, you don't know what you're going to do.
Right.
Nobody's prepared for what happens when a tornado rips the roof off your house. You're just not prepared for that mentally, any kind of way. But you can do what you can to cover some of the physical basis. So then you can spend some of your time not worrying about whether you have food and water. You can process the event.
I agree wholeheartedly. You really can't depend on the government, and you really just have to understand the human spirit, because in moments like that, you sort of just together. And any type of event that we've had during my entire life, especially during Katrina, people just come together and they start to realize. I mean, I don't care about your race, about your age, your whatever. We all need to stick together to survive this thing. So when you were talking about the government, I thought about something. If you permit me to read this, this is from an essay I wrote called Living Spaces. It shouldn't take too long, but the people of New Orleans seem to come back in half-seas. So many of them broken apart by Katrina's hard hands. The people's hearts and minds and all their internals were there, but just beneath the surface, they were barely functioning. The looks on their faces would sometimes haunt me into my evening hour and into my dreams. One night, I dreamed of a man returning home as though he had been living on the open plains. And when he returned home, there instead of his house was a yellowed glob of mud spread out over the ground, thick and obviously meant to replace what once was his home. I saw his son, quite the man, quite like the man. Both stood looking about in wonder. I knew they would find no answer, so I left them standing there. Mostly, though, it's the conversations about FEMA that caught my ear. They said my trailer would be here a month ago, and I still haven't seen it. No, listen to this. FEMA tried to give my neighbor $20,000, and they didn't even have half that damage. My neighbor told them to keep that money and give it to someone who needed it. Your neighbor was sure crazy. I'm getting all I can from FEMA, because the government sure done got plenty from me. Me too, girl. Them crazies at FEMA messed up our paperwork and bought us 2 trailers. You think we told them about it? Sure didn't. My grandmother's house was covered in 9 feet of water, and FEMA told her she didn't even qualify for a trailer. Someone else latches on to the conversation. Why are all y'all sitting around waiting on FEMA? God give you hands, you better get to using them. Sound like somebody with plenty of money, honey. Girl, you ain't never lied. I don't know what she's talking about anyway. I know rich folks and poor folks living in FEMA trailers. What else they gonna stay in? Now, that's the truth. I saw one over the Christmas holidays, was all lit up, decorated, so nice. Who got enough gumption to throw some lights on a FEMA trailer? I don't know what you mean. I think it's a little heaven smiling down on all of us. Yes, Lord, you may be right. I was thinking about giving mine a name. High fives all around. You too. I saw somebody name theirs the Creole Queen. You know, this is still the big easy. People just take whatever happened and figure out a way to keep going. They ain't no more worried about tomorrow than yesterday is. Yeah, you're right. That was an essay about living spaces and New Orleans. after Katrina was just a part of that essay. But it's wonderful going back and reading it, now and saying, yeah, these are actual conversations that I heard where you're out there. And the FEMA, I think, was the biggest conversational starter wherever you went.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yeah, I would say, just Kyla, to your point, I think a lot of people don't realize 2005 was a very big year for hurricanes and named storms and tropical everything. And 2020 was worse. And like they go 1-2. Katrina was one of the, deadliest. But you think about how many people died in Galveston in 1900 in that storm. 10,000 people. And that was before we had, I think the thing that, a lot of us focused on was this idea of we live in this country that claims to be the greatest in the world. We have all this wealth. And where is FEMA? We were not far from 55, but, a lot of us were going to Batesville to get gas, and doing things. And we're like, where are these trucks? Where is this army? Which way were they coming? Did they get lost? Did they turn off at the wrong way at Memphis? It was really kind of a bit of a joke, but at the same point, it wasn't, and it was, I think, even though we're here in, 2025, I think all of us here in the DC metro area are really happy that Aaron took a right turn. Because, you saw and all I kept thinking is, if that thing, that's going to be worse than, because the East Coast isn't nearly as, prepared. But I would say, to your point, both of your points, I think Louisianans in particular, but New Orleans people I are just warriors. I have nothing, when people say they're from there, I just have nothing but respect, because they've ridden out so many storms. Everybody has a Katrina story. And I think it's one of the odd things to say. It's a bonding experience among Southerners, but I also think Katrina, the experience is very Southern. I don't know that the same kind of response would have happened if we weren't in the South, but I don't know. I'd like to think it would, but I think that for me, it was a testament of the heart of the South, if you will.
One thing I thought was interesting, now that we're talking about the actual federal response and the state response, is that once they got here, it was like they couldn't do anything, really. They couldn't, I've read of, I know up here, and I heard this said over the radio, up here they were telling people not to bring food to the different shelters because they couldn't take it, because it wasn't prepared in a certified kitchen. And they couldn't take it. If somebody got food poisoning, they would be liable. And I thought, are you kidding me? Really? That's your response to this, is it's not a ServSafe kitchen. There's one place that lost its certification as a Red Cross shelter because it didn't have showers. It was a church. You don't put church showers on a church anywhere. I think it's James Baldwin said something one time that really resonated with me when I was preparing to do this. He said, those who say it can't be done are often interrupted by someone doing it. And there was a lot of that after Katrina, people just doing what needed to be done. And in the face of government regulation, in the face of the representatives of the government saying, we can't do that. And you got somebody saying, well, if you won't, I will.
Yeah, it was just a lot of confusion.
Lots of trucks.
Yeah. I was just saying it was a lot of confusion, lots and lots of confusion. The government, it just didn't seem to, FEMA in particular, didn't seem to know what they were doing. And you could feel it. I had a cousin and her family, a beautiful family of boys, 5 of them were living in a church for a long time until they were able to get a FEMA trailer. And then they had to stay in that FEMA trailer for a number of years, I think. And so just a lot of confusion.
Well,
Wow. And we have someone we actually have lots of great comments in the chat. And somebody has said that they believe that the South, in quotes, like what the South, but experienced disparate treatment regarding the overall response. And I'd heard that actually. I think Audrey and I have talked about that in the past, that there was this moment with Katrina, when I say moment, I might mean days, when you're like waiting for the country to show up. Like, hey, we're all in this together, right? We're all part of the same country. We're all the same folks, and we're hurting. And where are you? That there was this sort of feeling of absence from care from elsewhere. Is that am I understanding that correctly? Did it feel like you were on your own?
Well, that could be why.
It was a reckoning. It's a racial reckoning. I felt like it was just like, this is crazy. Because if this had been anywhere else, I don't know it would have taken so long.
Juyanne, I was going to say that could be why the people in the South, in particular in this area, we were prone to just depend on ourselves, each other. You don't believe that other people are going to help you. So you know how to, carry on, as it were. Yeah.
I think, and this was kind of my statement on the whole thing, as far as people saying, talking about Mississippi always has connections in the government. And I said, the governor of Mississippi during Katrina was Haley Barbour, who was like the kingpin of the National Republican Party, head of the RNC for so long before he ran for governor of Mississippi. And if he couldn't convince George W. Bush to send people down here, nobody could. You see what I'm saying? He had pull, and even he couldn't get it done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. Someone saying?
I said it was just sad.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk about, I'm so glad, Juyanne, that you read some of your work, which I love so much. And it's so wonderful to get to hear it. So for Julie and Juyanne, you are writers, and we know that the storm has shaped your writing. Julie, you have a whole book, Hurricane Baby, which is about the aftermath of Katrina. And I know that, Juyanne, you have stories and essays, and we just heard some of that. So can you just talk to us? I want to talk about both your personal experiences from both of you about how the storm has affected your writing, but also in a more general term about why art matters and why we go to art sometimes to unpack these experiences and I'll just stop there. And I'd love to hear from either one of you, whichever one wants to jump in first.
I think with me, it was that if you wrote it down as the truth, nobody would believe you. There's a lot of that going around. But the situations, what happened to me after Hurricane Katrina was I had a profound crisis of faith. How could a good God let this happen to good people? It was very deep and very profound, and it took me a lot of years to work my way through it. And Hurricane Baby was part of working my way through it. And writing all this out that I felt inside about the kinds of stories I had heard, about people going to get somebody out from under their house, and they get there and they're dead, or they're so injured they can't be helped. Just had to leave them there. Or the people going to hospitals that happen to still be operating, and you triage. You take the most serious people first, and sometimes that works well to help the people that are the sickest. Sometimes it doesn't, and people die waiting for help, literally die waiting for help. And all those stories made it into the book because I think I was trying to sort out, what do you do when you don't know what to do? And all these characters in this book make decisions, some of them decisions they wish they could take back. And others of them do the best with the information they have at hand. But just the commonality in all the stories is just that they're trying to do what they can, but they don't know how to deal with what's happening to them. They're just trying to make it, like you said, make it through the day, and they don't understand why this is happening to them. And we as humans try to find meaning in what happens to us. And I had to come to the conclusion is that sometimes there are questions with no answers.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Katrina. It's a question with no answer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think the years following Katrina, I wrote a lot. This Katrina found its way into every little essay, every story that I wrote. The final essay in my collection of essays called The Woodpecker. My dad was, his last weeks of his life were in a Katrina trailer. And I was there with him. And I said, he waits for me to come to him to cross the small room of the Katrina trailer. I have been sitting at the table, still eating my breakfast. So there's that. So you had little tiny moments. And then I had an essay that I wrote like Christmas Eve of 2006. So I'd been back in New Orleans, not quite 2 months. And I was suffering from Katrina cough because all of the people who came back to the city early, all of the, devastation and the trash and the mold and the smells, all of it, it just, it really affected a lot of us. And I developed a cough that did not leave. So the Katrina cough. So anyway, I was there that night, Christmas Eve, not a lot of people in town and no one to talk to. And so I sat down to write, and I wrote an essay called As Fortunes Go. And near the end of it, I again talk about trees because trees mean so much to me. Having grown up on a farm and, a lot of land and trees just mean so much to you in so many ways. So I wrote about the trees. Katrina took most of our trees away with her. They say it will take 250 years to bring them back to what they were just a few months ago. In those first moments after Katrina hit, when I walked outside and saw the fresh eyes, with fresh eyes, how weird the destruction of life can be, I wanted to cry out for the trees, for all of those that would not live again. Most came up by the roots and laid themselves down as though they were sleeping. Others, God had reached down and snapped them in two. Walking amongst their dead, I stepped, crawled, or pulled myself over the largest of trunks. Some had held their limbs high as though they were afraid of drowning. So later, I actually personified an old oak tree and the Spanish moss that had draped itself over the oak tree like they were lovers. And I wrote a story about that as well. So, mostly the years following Katrina, I would say at least 10 years after, I was still mentioning Katrina. Today, I rarely do. Mostly I just write about, things that are happening in New Orleans. The collection of stories that I'm writing, trying to get published is basically called New Orleans Proper. And it's about lots of things that happen in the city. And Katrina is one of those. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it never really goes away.
No, I don't think so.
No. I would love to hear from you. Actually, my colleague, I said we have a colleague who's working with us backstage, and she has a question that I want to talk to you about. She's wondering if you could talk about other creative works that you've witnessed that were a direct result of Katrina. So her example that she has is she went to New Orleans in 2017 and she bought a gorgeous painting that had a letter on the back that explains that the wood used for the art piece came from one of the homes that was lost during Katrina. And so I'm wondering, and maybe also Audrey's a librarian and it's fun to challenge her when we do these events. Let's see how quick she can Google and put things in the chat. Do you have authors or other kind of Katrina stories or works of art, doesn't have to be from a writer, that you think our viewers should expand in addition to your own works to just kind of read or that resonate that experience?
Okay, I'm going to jump in here because I pre-prepared.
Oh,
so,
okay.
But I think for me, like the Sherry Fink's book on 5 Days at Memorial is like a must read.
Who's it by?
Her name is Sherry Fink.
Okay.
She wrote 5 Days at Memorial. Library has copies. But that book really encapsulates the decisions or lack of decisions that were made that were just last minute craziness. Jessamine Ward is a big Mississippian. And I think she's from Mississippi, pretty sure.
Yeah, she is.
But her Salvage of the Bones is another Katrina book. Sarah Brooks's The Yellow House is also, I think, won the National Book Award not too long ago. But a lot of people, I'm sorry?
Broom, I think her name. I thought her name Broom.
Is
Yellow
it Broom
House?
or Brooks?
Anyway.
Yeah. And then, James Lee Burke has one, Dave Eggers have, a lot of people, but I still don't know. And I'll leave this to my fellow panelists, but I don't know that I've read the quintessential Katrina book only because you can't. Mm-hmm. It's all these stories like together that make up the story of Katrina.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I've read so many books. I mean, to mention one, and just living here, anytime you go anywhere, you go to festivals, you see people with little nuggets of things that remind you of Katrina, the little house. I'm a veteran, so I go to the VA and they have this arts festival once a year. And a lot of times the veterans will put a piece that reminds us of Katrina. Last year, I think one of the veterans had built a Katrina house, and it was just beautiful. So yeah, I think it's just all around New Orleans. Yeah.
I think the only one that I know about, it was kind of what I used as a model for my book that you haven't already mentioned, is Aftermath Lounge by Margaret McMillan. And what hers is there's a house that is used in, I think, Bay St. Louis as a home base for people doing relief work. And it's a collection of stories from each of those different people that come through that house. It's fiction as far as I know, but that's the only other one I think to mention that you haven't already brought up.
What's it called? Aftermath Lounge?
Aftermath Lounge, yeah.
Okay, and we had Margaret McMillan for a Lunch and Learn in the fall, actually, for a different book of hers. So it's great to hear her mentioned again. So hopefully people who are watching at home, you're able to take in some of these suggestions and explore them. I know we're getting. Oh, go ahead.
I would also say that there are a lot of people who were living into Katrina. For example, I have a friend who was living here with her family and had sort of migrated to New Orleans, was living here and was calling it home and felt, that they belonged here, I think. She's a workshop buddy. But anyway, they ended up sort of going to Germany and places there and meeting all these refugees, and she writes about it. So there's that, people who were affected and they go to these other places and end up having new lives and they write about that. So I've always been impressed with that as well. So yeah.
Thank you all for those suggestions. There's a lot, and I was making me think about all the things that I need to read and how I'm constantly. One of the wonderful things about my job is getting to have these conversations with people and be reminded on a weekly basis how much I have to learn about so many things, and that's a privilege to be able to do that. I want to go back to, we were talking a little bit about this environmental justice and this climate change, which I know for you folks currently living in Louisiana, living in Mississippi, that you really are on the front lines of that all the time. Do you think that there's, because of Katrina and how much Katrina has resonated, do you think that more vulnerable areas will fare better in the future because there's a no. There's a direct no. Okay, go ahead. Go, just jump in. Okay, go ahead.
I don't think so. And why I say that is because the casinos bought up all that land on the Strip in Mississippi and erected very tall casinos and hotels and condos right there on the coast where they watched. The Hard Rock Cafe was supposed to open the day after Katrina came through, and Katrina put the guitar on the Hard Rock Casino in to another casino's front lobby. I mean, it's ridiculous. But the casinos bought up a lot of that land, and developers bought up a lot of that land, and they put up condos, condo towers, and parking garages, and hotels, and casinos, and they're acting like it can't happen again. And I think they're crazy.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just going to say the young woman I was talking about, her name is Sheila Mattery. If you ever have the opportunity to read her work, yeah, very, very interesting. But what's the question? I'm sorry.
Just do we feel like because of what happened from Katrina and it's long, the post-Katrina rebuilding and the failures in that and lessons learned, do you think that these more vulnerable areas to climate change and to this environmental justice or injustice, are they more likely to be less harmed in a future catastrophe? Basically, are they better off now with all the lessons learned from Katrina? And Julie is like, that's a hard no. And so what about you?
I'd say a hard no as well. I mean, look at, the floods in Texas recently. Whenever we have any type of disaster, the government doesn't seem to be all that close to they respond. And I think they do a really good job. I have a sister who works with the government, and she is always talking about how, good they are about that. She's very proud of her work, and we're proud of her. So, yeah, I think they do their best, but disaster by definition, it's just something that comes upon you and you just can't prepare for it. So we're sometimes fortunate. We say that we see a hurricane coming, and yet, you're not ever really prepared for what might happen because most of the hurricanes are different. And I think that's one of the things about Katrina that the reason why we will always remember it is because it was so different, and it had elements that you had never seen before. I think someone talked about Camille. Prior to Katrina, that was like the great storm, and like Camille, and you'd say it and people go, frightened. But yeah, I don't think you can prepare. And fortunately, we do have a government, hopefully, that will continue to support its citizens in that way because you need it. When you have loss is when you need the government to step in and help you. And that's why we have a government. So I don't know who said it, but the civilization, the reason why we have it is we come together and we agree that we're going to help each other. We're civilized people, so we should be able to help each other.
Right. I love that. Oh, Audrey?
I was just going to say, I think we miss opportunities with these storms to really come together. They affect so many different communities. I think that I have never really been, Katrina kind of broke my faith in the federal government in a lot of ways. And I'm very skeptical on most days, and seeing what we've seen in Texas and Tennessee and places, it's a slow response. It's, people acting like these things can't happen. Like it's like a failure of imagination, but it's also, I don't see a lot of empathy. And I wish that we did. And I wish we could use those to come together as a people and really, it's really, I feel like sometimes it's like, well, have you earned the right to be an American person, and if not, we're not going to really feel that. And I just really feel like that, my jury's still out on that. But I'm a pretty hard no on that.
Yeah. This has given us a lot to think about. We are out of time, but I want to just talk to the audience for a second. I know that people can feel helpless when it comes to climate change and environmental justice. These things seem bigger than anything we can solve by separating out our recycling. But I want to encourage you, the viewers, to keep doing what you are doing in your own way. So the metaphorical and literal separating of your recycling, but also call your representatives. Politicians work for you. You are the boss. So use your voice to encourage them to take larger actions, to make policies, to fight climate change, and to support people experiencing disasters. I want to encourage us all also not to get too disheartened or overwhelmed by stories of suffering, especially as challenging weather events increase. If there is one thing we're all in together, it is actually this. So be neighborly and help where you can, extend a hand in kindness and reach out with a thoughtful word. It all really, really matters. And please check out the books by our authors. Julie Whitehead's short story collection, Hurricane Baby, which, as we said, just came out last year, and it's really a gripping read. And Juyanne James's 2 wonderful collections, The Persimmon Trail and Other Stories, and Table Scraps and Other Essays. These are wonderful works that capture human moments that resonate for all of us. For our panelists, thank you so much for being here and sharing so fully of yourselves. To viewers, thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with us, whether watching live or tuning in on demand later. You are why we do what we do, and we hope you'll join us at another event soon. Next week's Lunch and Learn, which is rescheduled from August 19th due to a little technical problem, but we're coming back with the book Wanda Hears the Stars. We have author Amy Hansen talking about this beautiful new book. And the week after that, we have Lauren Rhodes, another person from Mississippi, in conversation about her brilliant new memoir, Split the Baby. So please learn more about all the work that we do by visiting civilrights.mypgc.us. Please visit the library at pgcmls.events. And in terms of our authors today, we have been putting links in the chat as you've been watching. Please go visit their websites, get their books. If you're not in the position to buy their books today from your favorite independent bookstore, you can get them up from your local library system. And if your local library system doesn't have them, ask them to get them in. All right. Thank you, everybody. Audrey, Juyanne, Julie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye, everyone.